Are you old enough to remember a time when work involved a fairly simple transaction? You gave up your time and labour in exchange for a company's cash. Provided you did your job reasonably well, hit targets, met standards, pleased customers, then all was well. There were clear lines of demarcation. The firm was in the business of making money, you were in the business of making a living. But then something happened. Companies started to think it was okay to tell employees not just what they could earn, but what they should think. You may have experienced this shift yourself. Unless you work for yourself or for a small family business, you will have noticed perhaps how modern corporations now insist on a role in the moral formation of their employees, a role once reserved for spiritual or political leaders. One manifestation of this urge to shape the character of staff is the unconscious bias course. Perhaps you've attended one. I did a couple of years ago, and I have to say it was pretty much the final nail in the coffin of my 24-year-long association with Sky TV. My employer got off on the wrong foot straight away. You see, language matters, doesn't it? And when, along with everyone else, I was invited to participate in a course that was described as compulsory, my hackles went vertical. An invitation, by definition, can be declined. How do you refuse a compulsory course where attendance is mandatory? Well, to my shame, I agreed to that invitation without a bat squeak of dissent. And worse still, at the end of the online session on Microsoft Teams, when the moderator asked if anyone had any questions, I sat on my hands, which was cowardly and supine, because I did have a question. I'd found the presenter's thesis that as a white man I was guilty of seeing the world oblivious to my own prejudices utterly unconvincing. It was snake oil and pseudo-science dressed up as Holy Writ. Any questions? Of course I had a question. How much are you charging for this twaddle? Is what I should have said, what I wanted to say. The words formed in my throat, but that's where they stayed. Perhaps you've had a similar experience. Maybe you attempted to critique an unconscious bias course, but thought better of it, having a mortgage to pay or a promotion in mind, perhaps. Maybe you just kept your gob shut and shared your true feelings with an intimate later on. That's what Simon Isherwood thought he was doing in March last year. The 60-year-old had also just finished an unconscious bias course on Teams. He, like me, thought it was meretricious guff and told his wife so. Unfortunately, he did so without turning his computer microphone off. His colleagues, some of them seemingly heard everything. As the Daily Telegraph reported today, there were complaints, and after a disciplinary, Simon was out on his ear, even though his 11 years at the company had hitherto been exemplary. What did he say that was so offensive? Apparently, he wasn't complimentary about the course and dared to wonder whether there was such a thing as black as well as white privilege. Specifically, and because he has a friend from West Africa, he wondered whether there was such a thing as black privilege in Ghana. If that's all that was said, it sounds incredibly innocuous. But in the looking-glass world of unconscious bias, the mere act of questioning its legitimacy is a kind of shop-floor heresy and career suicide. Now, there may be another side to this story. Mr. Isherwood has taken his dismissal to an employment tribunal scheduled to wrap up tomorrow. And his employers aren't saying anything on the record until the process is completed. According to the Telegraph, West Midlands Trains denies the allegations and argues that Mr. Isherwood's remarks were offensively expressed. But I think this case, if it is as described, raises important questions about the nature of the modern workplace, about the willingness of companies and the HR executives within them to play a role once reserved, frankly, for the priesthood, to tell us how we should relate to the world around us, what our original sins look like. These companies have no democratic mandate for the ideologies they foist on employees who feel rightly chilled into silence. They have no right to interfere in areas that are a matter for individual conscience. This corporate overreach has to stop, and the people who should stop it are those we've chosen, through elections, to codify our behaviour. It's time MPs told big businesses they have no right to be our moral guardians. That's the Brazier angle.